And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, Western allies are warning that all signs seem to point to a Russian invasion of Ukraine. According to the US government, the number of Russian troops stationed along Ukraine's border in Russia and in neighboring Belarus, and including rebels in eastern Ukraine, is close to 200,000. Reports that Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russian rebels engaged in shelling that intensified over the weekend. That's also raised fear that this could provide a pretext for Moscow to launch a full-scale attack. To discuss the latest developments, I'm joined by Melinda Haring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us again.
Good morning, Soo Young. Great to be here.
And well, Director, since last week, Western governments, they've been warning that there could be a Russian invasion of Ukraine any time. How dire does the situation look to you right now?
The situation looks very dire. I think that diplomacy is on life support. Today, the National Security Council in the United States had a 4-hour-long meeting. President Biden canceled his travel after that. There's a lot of indications that there may be action, unfortunately, in Ukraine this week. We don't know what President Putin's going to do, though. He has a number of options. Like you said, he has 190,000 troops to the north, to the east, and the south of Ukraine, and he could go in at any time.
Well, NATO said that Moscow is planning a full-scale attack, and if the Russians do invade, then how would this operation be launched?
That's a great question. I wish I could give you a direct answer. So Putin has a couple of options. He can do a full-scale land invasion. He might start in the north in Kharkiv. The border between Russia and Ukraine is poorly defended, so Kharkiv would be pretty easy to take. He could go down to Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, and that will be very difficult to take. There will be a massive insurgency if he tries to take Kiev. He would go down to Dnipro and then down to Odessa, and that would be about a third of the country. So if you look at Ukraine and you look at the river, the Dnipro River, from the Dnipro River over to the east, he could take about a third of the country. I don't think he's going to do that, though. I think that's too much of a stretch. I don't think he has enough troops, and I think the insurgency would be too strong. There's a new poll out from the Razumkov Center. It's a public polling firm in Kiev, and it says that 45% of Ukrainians will fight and will resist. Personally, I think that number is a little bit low. I think that we will see higher numbers of people resisting. I don't think that's what Putin's up to. What I think he's going to do is he's going to stir up trouble in the Donbass. That's in eastern Ukraine. So President Putin and his Russian-backed separatists control about 7% of Ukraine in 2 different oblasts in eastern Ukraine. This is part of the Luhansk Oblast and part of the Donetsk Oblast. And right now, there have been all sorts of weird things happening. There was a kindergarten that was blown up over the weekend, a pipeline that exploded. There's been all sorts of provocative actions. And basically, the Russians are trying anything they can to get the Ukrainians to overreact so that the Russians could respond in kind. And fortunately, the Ukrainians have remained calm and they haven't overreacted so far.
And well, there are currently there are talks between the West and Kiev right now taking place, discussing how they'd arm Ukrainian forces should Russia invade. And well, US President Joe Biden, he's ruled out any chance of sending US troops, but he said that he will respond swiftly and decisively. So what does he mean by that?
So President Biden has done a good job of putting a sanctions package together. He has pulled together all the major Western European countries. And if Putin invades Ukraine again, the United States and the Western allies will put together what I like to call the meanest, nastiest package of sanctions Russia has ever seen. On a 10-point scale, the current package of sanctions is about a 2 or 3. And the package that the West will put on Putin if he invades again is more like an 8 or 9. So it's really serious. You'll see more NATO troops put in Eastern Europe, and you'll see more defensive material, so more weapons being put in Ukraine as well. This is not what Vladimir Putin wants. A lot of people have pointed out, if Vladimir Putin wants fewer NATO troops, if he wants fewer NATO members, if he wants fewer weapons in Ukraine, he has not accomplished what he wants. He's going to get the opposite as a result of escalating. Right now, Vladimir Putin has accomplished exactly the opposite of what he seeks. in terms of NATO and defensive assistance.
And to what extent do you think that Washington, along with other Western allies, the UK, Germany and other European nations, to what extent will they support and defend Ukrainians? Are there still differences when it comes to the level of action that they're willing to take?
So there is some unknown about this. You're right that Joe Biden has said there will be no American troops on the ground. He's been very clear about that. But he's left open the ability to use the Air Force and to use ships. So if Putin does strike, the U.S. could use its massive Air Force and its ships to strike or to fire back. I don't know if he's going to do that, but at least the president has kept that open. I think Biden made a mistake, though. So Putin, the West has a very weak hand when it comes to Ukraine. It's true that Russia cares more about Ukraine than the West does. That's just a fundamental reality. Russia is much closer than the United States is, right? And what do we do by this? So we try to maintain some kind of strategic ambiguity. You don't rule out options. Even if President Biden is not going to send troops, he never should have said that. I think that was a mistake. So we don't know what the Western allies will send if it comes to that. You know, there's more and more defensive assistance that's being sent over. I haven't heard of any Western governments, though, that have pledged to put troops on the ground, and I would be surprised if they did, honestly.
And well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he's called on the West to take stronger action, and he said that he wants a clear time frame for Ukraine to join NATO. And well, it seems that the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian public, they're not really satisfied with what the West has been doing so far. And also the pace of diplomatic efforts as well. So what kind of support does Kiev want?
That's a great question. So there's a big division between Kiev and Washington. I was in Kiev 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that sticks out to me is, excuse me, Kiev is very angry and very aggressive, and it keeps saying, stop using this overheated rhetoric. Stop saying that Putin could strike at any minute. It's driving the economy into the ground. And the Ukrainian economy is being artificially propped up right now. And it can probably withstand about 3 to 6 months of the current situation. But if Ukraine doesn't have exports, the economy is going to be in bad shape. So one of the options is that Putin just sits on the border and he menaces Ukraine. And if he sits there for 3 to 6 months, Ukraine is in really serious trouble.
What would you say Volodymyr Zelensky's strategy is in terms of diffusing tensions and avoiding war?
So there's a weird feeling in Ukraine. It's partly avoidance and it's partly fatalism. You have to remember, Ukraine has been at this since 2014. Russia came in and they snapped up the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. In 2015, they went into the Donbass, into eastern Ukraine, and they occupy 7% of Ukraine. So this is not Putin's first rodeo in Ukraine. Right? Ukrainians have been at war. They've been victims of Russian aggression since 2014. That's a long time. So in some senses, people sort of shrug their shoulders and say, we know what to do. We've been prepared for this moment for a long time. Zelensky has done a great job. He has a stiff upper lip. And I think it was last Wednesday, he called for a day of unity. And he asked everyone to come out and sing the national anthem. He has not gone in the bunker. He's at the Munich Security Conference here speaking. He gave a very defiant speech, and he called on the West to back them, to back Ukraine. And he said something very powerful. I think it was very convincing. He said, we are fighting your fight. This is not about Ukraine. This is about stopping the Kremlin now. If we don't stop them in Ukraine, they're going to keep going. They're going to keep at it. So we have to stop the Kremlin now. I think that was a very, very powerful speech. I'm very critical of President Zelensky. I think he's been bad on domestic reforms, and he has not advanced Ukraine's European aspirations in fighting corruption. But he's done a darn good job as the commander-in-chief during this crisis. He's not afraid. He keeps walking around in a hard helmet and his flak jacket, and he's talking to soldiers. He's rallying the Ukrainian people. I would like to see the Ukrainian government do more to harden the Russian-Ukrainian border. It's a very, very long border. I don't think they're prepared there. I'd like to see them do more to prepare for war in terms of government planning and be more open about that. But I know that the discussions are underway.
And well, Britain and the US, they've been threatening stronger, more targeted sanctions on Russia. And The question is, though, are these going to work against Mr. Putin, who clearly has very ideological imperial ambitions?
Okay, so sanctions alone are never going to work. You have to have sanctions plus deterrence. And we have a decent package of sanctions that we will put on Russia if Putin invades again. But I think our deterrence game, and our means the West, I think the West's deterrence game has been weak. We should have been sending stingers. We should have been sending more defensive equipment to Ukraine much earlier. And NATO should have put many more troops in Eastern Europe a long time ago. So sanctions are not a silver bullet. They're not going to solve the problem. There's some analysis, too, that says that the sanctions the West would put on Putin are not going to actually hurt him or his inner circle. So I think that's something that the West should be considering as we put together, our options.
Well, what does the Ukraine crisis imply about United States' role in the world? And what message does it send to America's partners in East Asia who are observing this very closely?
So I can't answer that question now because it depends on how this all turns out. The reason why Ukraine matters, and it should matter to your viewers, is that if America does not live up to its agreements, if Putin wins in Ukraine, his appetite will not be satisfied, and he's going to keep pushing, and he's going to keep trying to grab more and more land. And it means that authoritarians can do what they want. It means that the rules that we established after World War II don't matter. It means that might makes right. And it will empower China and other authoritarians to go ahead and try to keep testing. Will the Chinese go after Taiwan? Will they keep up their bad behavior in the South China Sea? Definitely. So I'm worried about it for that reason. I'm also worried because if Putin succeeds in Ukraine in a big way, there's going to be a massive refugee crisis in Europe. There will be 2 to 3 million Ukrainian refugees that will be pouring into Poland and into the European Union. And this could also devolve into a world war if it goes really badly. That's why the Ukraine crisis matters. It's not about Ukraine. It's about Western commitment and resolve. We said that countries have a right to choose their own futures and to choose who they want to align with. And Russia can't decide that. China can't decide it. It's up to each sovereign country. And the United States cannot fail this test.
Well, before we go, diplomats the West keeps saying that a diplomatic solution is possible. Now, what would this look like, and how does the probability look like to you?
Soo Young, I'm really skeptical of this. Diplomats always say that a diplomatic solution is possible, but at this point, I don't see how we get there. So Russia says that it wants to determine who is and who is not a NATO member. It wants veto power over it. And NATO and the United States have said, heck no, we're never going to agree to this. So we are at an impasse, and there's no way to solve that problem. I don't know how you get around that. That's why things have really devolved to a pre-war state, and war could break out at any moment. There's nothing that the United States can offer Russia that will satisfy them. And Washington knows that. It has to say that it's continuing to try to negotiate, and it should continue to talk to Russia, and we should give them the option to stand down. But I'm very, very skeptical that they will.
So right now, would you say it's important to just keep Mr. Putin talking rather than taking action?
I think it's important to keep Putin talking and keep sending that defensive material to Ukraine and get the Ukrainian stingers as soon as possible.
I see. Well, this is where we have to end the interview today. That was Melinda Haring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thank you again so much for your time today.
Thank you.